Thank you very much for taking the time with us today. I know you're a busy guy.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
So we'll get right into it. President Trump, on his first international trip, goes to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Why?
Well, first of all, the Saudi-U.S. relationship is strong, and it has been strong for 7 decades. This relationship started with President Roosevelt, who's a Democrat, and has been strengthening since then with different presidents of the United States, Democrats and Republicans. So this is a continuation of this historic, strong relationship that has, protected people of both countries on the security side, and also it has, on the economic side, created a lot of jobs and opportunities in both countries and helped the economy. President Trump's visit is an important visit to the Muslim world. I believe that it is vital for the United States to have a strong relationship with Saudi Arabia and the Muslim world. And I think the President's speech on that visit was very encouraging to Muslim people to see. He spoke about the counterterrorism, and he said that ISIS and the terrorist groups' victims are mostly Muslims. And I think it's very important for Muslim people to hear the President of the United States mentioning this.
What were some of the policies that were discussed during that trip? Obviously, counterterrorism was high on the agenda. I believe you opened the Center for Counterterrorism in Riyadh during that trip. What were some of the other policies?
Well, we have spoke about ways to increase our bilateral cooperation on the security side, defense, and most importantly, the economic side. We have continued to work with this current administration, and we will continue to work with the United States to build this important relationship.
Also, there was a big arms component for that trip. What happened there?
Well, there has been always a strong cooperation between Saudi Arabia and the United States on defense procurement. We have been an important customers to American companies that have created a lot of jobs throughout our cooperation on the defense procurement, and we'll continue to work with our United States and the American companies to build our armed forces that we use to counter terrorism and malign actors in the region.
Let's talk about terrorism in the region. What are the greatest threats to Saudi Arabia today?
Well, I believe the biggest threats to the region and to the international security is basically Iranian regime and its proxies on one side, and ISIS and Al-Qaeda and terrorist organization on the other side. We believe that they're both two sides of the same coin. They believe in the same concept, not necessarily exactly the same ideology, but they both do not believe in the sovereignty of nations. They both believe in transnational ideological state. They both do not believe in international law. And sometimes they compete with each other and they fight each other. But when it comes to us, we're the common enemy, and they cooperate.
Why are you the common enemy?
Well, because we are a force of stability, force of peace, force of prosperity in the region. What we want to do in Saudi Arabia is we have currently this great Vision 2030, where we want to reform our economy to basically untap the potential in Saudi Arabia, to open our new sectors in Saudi Arabia, and to have a prosperous country, and to move our citizens forward. To be able to do that, we need a stable, secure region. We need and prosperous region. We need to increase our economic cooperation with neighboring countries. Iran wants to export the revolution. Iran has an expansionist ideology. Iran wants other states in the region not to be our partners, but to be under the Iranian expansionist project. And this is a big difference. We have Vision 2030 that is moving us forward. They have Vision 1979 that is trying to move the region and Saudi Arabia backward.
I read an article that you wrote recently that compares Iran to Germany in the 30s, expansionist, and that we're sort of appeasing Iran in its expansionist policies. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Well, what I was trying to say in the op-ed is basically the situation in the world, especially in Europe, in the late 30s, was back then we had this expansionist ideology in expansionist countries. We see, Nazi Germany moving and taking over, Austria and parts of Czechoslovakia. And the solution back then was to appease Germany, Nazi Germany, and instead of confronting it. And and we remember that during the Munich Agreement, when President Chamberlain went back to Britain and held that piece of paper and said, this is the peace of our time. And it did not work. It led to more expansionism. It led to the invasion of France. London was getting bombed after this. So what we want in the region is we see same expansionist concept in the region through the Iranian regime, and we believe that we need to push back on this right now, not to lead to a bigger conflict. Because if you look at the trend in the region throughout this 40 years after the Iranian Revolution, we see Iran started to build this sectarian terrorist militia in Lebanon, and they bombed embassies, they bombed the Marine barracks. They had assassinated the prime minister of Lebanon, and they're trying to copy that model and use the same playbook in Syria and Iraq and Yemen, and they've been getting away with it. So and now we see more than 160 ballistic missiles launched at a G20 country towards Saudi Arabia, and so if we do not push back on this, we will see more terrorist militia pops up in the region. And let's remember, Hezbollah in Lebanon is not a domestic threat. Hezbollah is transnational threat. We see Hezbollah money laundering activities throughout the whole world. We see in Africa and in South America. We see their drug activities also throughout the world. And we don't want another Hezbollah, another transnational threat to appear. And we don't want, especially in Yemen, like the Houthis, for example. It's another Death to America group that we see in the region, and it's another transnational threat that we're trying to end, and to also affect the Red Sea, which 15% of the world trade passes through.
So let's talk about Yemen. You said Houthis, their slogan is death to America, death to Israel, death to the Jews. Yet there is collateral damage. It's now being called a humanitarian crisis. There's a cholera epidemic. The UN is now, getting involved. It's been called Saudi Arabia's Vietnam. What's happening there, and is it a war that you can win?
Well, first of all, we did not support the Yemeni government to start a war in Yemen. We supported the Yemeni government to end the war in Yemen. The party that started the war is the Iranian militia, the Houthis. They started the war in 2014 when they moved from their own hometown to the capital, killing and slaughtering the Yemeni people and threatening the central government of Yemen. And we had a choice back then to support the central government of Yemen, the legitimate central government of Yemen, against all terrorist non-state actors, the Houthis and the QAP. Or basically, if the Yemeni central government falls, we're only going to have two terrorist non-state actors, the Houthis and AQAP. And that situation, the instability that will happen and the vacuum that will happen, will create basically, will help both of them, AQAP and Houthis, and will create more terrorism and instability. So the only choice we have is to support the Yemeni government to basically reinstate the Yemeni government control over the country, to fix the Yemeni economy, to create jobs, to have prosperous Yemen, to improve the humanitarian situation that went downhill after the Houthis' aggression into Yemen. That is our objective, and we've been very successful now throughout our pressure campaign on the Houthis to sit in the negotiation table and to solve this problem and reach a long-lasting political solution. We have donated to Yemen more than any country in the world combined. We will continue to support the humanitarian efforts in Saudi Arabia. And during the last Crown Prince visit, Saudi Arabia and UAE donated to the UN the highest donation in the UN history on the UN humanitarian efforts. We're there to solve it, just like we did in Iraq with the United States. We could not solve the humanitarian situation in Mosul until Mosul was liberated, and the Iraqi government had government institutions came back to Mosul. You mentioned Vietnam in your question. Now, Vietnam is 7,000 miles away from the United States. Yemen is our neighbor, and we have more than 1,000-mile border with Yemen. I'm wondering if there's an Iranian proxy, Iranian militia in the United States southern border launching 160 ballistic missiles towards the United States, and including Washington. What would the United States do?
Sure. I think it's made in reference to an unwinnable war, because you have on one side Houthi rebels who say death to America, death to Israel, but who are also using people as shields for ballistic missiles, et cetera, et cetera. So you are going to get collateral damage. There is a humanitarian crisis, cholera epidemics, millions of refugees, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, the only way we end this humanitarian situation once and for all is to reach long-lasting political solution based on the UN Security Council Resolution 2216, which instates clearly that the Yemeni government should reinstate its control over the country, basically. We have been very supportive of all the previous UN initiatives to reach political solution. We have done 7 ceasefires in the past. We have supported all the UN initiatives. The Houthis have been the party that violates the ceasefire every time. They have been the parties who have been basically the obstacle to reaching peace in Yemen. The former UN envoy said in his last speech in the United Nations that Saudi Arabia has been always sitting at the negotiation table and the Houthis have been always walking away. So they are the obstacle. The ball is in their court. They need to choose between being an Iranian militia in Yemen, another Hezbollah in Yemen, launching ballistic missiles and having heavy weapons, or being a political party in Yemen. We want them to be part of Yemen, not part of Iran.
So let's unpack those countries that we talked about. We have Hezbollah in Lebanon. We have an increasing Iranian presence in Iraq. You have the Houthis in Yemen. So you're getting sort of Iranian presence surrounding Saudi Arabia. I mean, right now you have, let's say, 3 proxy conflicts. What happens when it ceases to be a proxy conflict?
Well, what we want in the region is different than what Iran wants in the region. We want partners. We want stability. We want security. We want countries that need to be independent. Saudi Arabia has 0 proxies in the Middle East. No one can name all the Iranian proxies in one sentence in the Middle East. I do not think the Iraqi people, the Yemeni people, the Lebanese people want to be part of basically the Iranian revolution, part of Tehran. They want to be an independent country. They want to move forward. They want to fix their economy. So I don't think the Iranian controls the Iraqi people or Iraq. I think Iraqi people must control Iraq. Lebanese people must control Lebanon. And I'll give you an example of the Saudi role in these areas. I mean, look at Lebanon, for example. Saudi Arabia have been very supportive of Lebanon, political stability. Saudi Arabia have basically, in their recent history, have supported Lebanon with about more than $5 billion. Recently, in the Paris conference to support Lebanon, Saudi Arabia have donated $2 billion. Saudi Arabia commercial exchange with Lebanon is $626 million. Saudi Arabia, basically, tourists used to be more than 20% of the Arab tourists to Lebanon. So we have been the party that is constructive in Lebanon. We send tourists to Lebanon. Iran sends terrorists to Lebanon. We send businessmen. Iran sends military advisors. We build hotels. We build the tourism sector. We create jobs. Iran create terrorists. We want Lebanon to be a better country, to be a stronger country, to be more stable. We want Lebanese people to advance, to be a prosperous country. Iran wants Lebanon to fight their own wars. Iran wants Lebanon to do their own expansionist project in Tehran. And if what the supreme leader in Iran wants is just about religion, then why do we always see a wali al-faqih, a supreme leader who comes from Iran? Why don't we see a Lebanese supreme leader or Iraqi supreme leader that the Iranian mullahs follow? We will never see that because Iran wants to use the Lebanon and Iraq and the Lebanese people as tools for their expansionist policies.
So if you look at Lebanon, on one side you have Sunni. In fact, this is mandated by the Constitution. On the other, Shia and then Druze. But we interviewed Hariri for this piece, and he was saying, look, we have a problem because we have not only Hezbollah, but we have now 2 million Syrians refugees who've come in. They have Palestinian refugees. It seems like he's a sort of bastion of sanity. He's like one of the only things holding that country together. His father famously was assassinated trying to hold the country together. But there was a kerfuffle recently during the elections or before the elections when he was called to Saudi Arabia. Some people said he was kidnapped. I asked him, he said he wasn't. What happened there? Why was he called to Saudi Arabia? What happened in Saudi Arabia? And then, he went back.
Well, I think you asked Saad Hariri, and I think that is the best answer you can get is from Saad Hariri himself.
Right.
But let me tell you how we look at Lebanon and Saad Hariri himself. Saad Hariri and his father were Saudi allies, and they are Saudi allies, and they will continue to be Saudi allies. We want Lebanese stability. We are helping Lebanon to become a more prosperous country. We want to create jobs. We want to move it forward. But look at the party that creates instability. It's not Saudi Arabia. It's the party that has assassinated the prime minister of Lebanon. It's the party that has used Lebanese people in conflict that has nothing to do with Lebanese national security. It's Hezbollah and Iran.
So if we look at it, though, it seems like there's kind of a de-escalation on the Israeli conflict, whereas there's an escalation on the Iranian conflict, not just with Saudi Arabia, but with Israel and various other countries. So the big question I have, and we talk about peace in the Middle East, and that's been a big question for a number of years, it seems like, if you're bringing up the sort of Nazi Germany allegory, that we're heading in the wrong direction. It seems like, Iran is expansionist, it's supporting terrorist groups. There's conflict in Yemen, there's conflict in Lebanon, there's conflict in Syria, there's conflict in Iran. Where does it end? How do we get to this peace in the Middle East? How do we move towards some sort of sane solution? Because we seem to be going in the wrong direction.
That's a great question. It should be asked to the Iranian regime.
We've asked them.
Because we are the party that we did not launch, we did not shot any bullet towards Iran. We're not launching ballistic missiles towards Iran. They are the party that is doing all these malign activities in the Middle East. What I'm saying is we need to pressure the Iranian regime to stop these activities that will lead us to a bigger conflict. If we do nothing, just like we did in the past years, it will lead us to a bigger conflict, because 5 years ago there was no ballistic missile launched towards Saudi Arabia. 20 years ago there was no Iranian militia in Iraq. So the trend is a continuous Iranian regime escalation in the region that will lead to a bigger conflict. But also at the same time, Iranian regime is having problems. They are basically destructive force. They're creating instability in the region. They have problem with their own country. They're using their domestic politics to serve their foreign policy, their expansionist foreign policy, instead of serving their own people. Look at the Iranian currency right now. It's at worse positions. Look at the Iranian economy. Where is it heading? I believe that the Iranian regime should stop their malign activities and focus on the Iranian people, just like what we're doing in Saudi Arabia. I mean, look at what's happening is exactly the opposite. We in Saudi Arabia since 1979 have doubled our GDP is 10 times more than 1979. In Iran, we used to have basically close GDP in 1979. Now we're more than half, more than double of the Iranian GDP. Look at the GDP per capita. The Saudi people's GDP per capita is way more than the Iranians. Look at the basically life expectancy. If you live in Saudi Arabia, you'll live 4 years more than in Iran. Look at our health system. Look at our education system. Look at our social reforms, our economic reforms in Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, there was never social media platform that was blocked. In Iran, they're continuing to block social media platforms. We're a country that wants to be the part of the global system. We're proud of our values. We're proud of our cultures. We are modernizing. We are not westernizing or easternizing Saudi Arabia. We're moving forward based on our own values, but we're moving forward. We have forward-looking vision. They have a backward-looking vision. We have Vision 2030. They have Vision 1979, basically. And that is the problem. It's a clash of visions between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
There was recently a controversial decision by the Trump administration to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. I say controversial because it was controversial domestically, as well as Europe decided not to go with America. When I talked to Prime Minister Netanyahu, he thought this was a very good thing, but he also said it could lead to increased atomic capabilities by Iran, in which case Israel would have to act. What's Saudi's position on pulling out of the deal, and also what will be some of the ramifications if they do try to speed up their atomic program?
Well, first of all, we stated that clearly, that we support the president's decision, because it's exactly right. He's correct. What the deal did is it temporarily stopped a weapon that the Iranian regime do not have. but it empowered every weapon that the Iranian regime already have. The asymmetric warfare.
Okay.
They increased the budget of the IRGC. They increased the budget of Hezbollah. They increased the budget of the Houthis. There was way more ballistic missile launched toward the kingdom after the nuclear deal than before the nuclear deal.
So just to clarify, maybe it slowed down or stopped their ability to create an atomic weapon, but it increased funding of Hezbollah, Houthis, like terrorist groups, you're saying?
Yes. What I'm saying is we might have temporarily stopped the weapon of mass destruction, but we created more mass destruction, basically, in the Middle East. And this is not the, we expected Iran, when we supported the President Obama's decision to sign the deal, to be a responsible actor in the region and to stop their malign activities. But what we saw is a negative, basically, results. We've seen Iran increasing their malign activities, increasing their support to the militias in the region, increasing the stability in the region. So that's why we do not, we supported the President's decision to withdraw from the nuclear deal.
If he withdraws from the deal, and now that there's sort of a strife between U.S. and Europe on this, Iran is increasing its aggressive activities. Israel is sort of getting ready for that. Maybe Saudi Arabia is getting ready for that. The GCC is getting ready for that. Doesn't that mean we're going in the wrong direction? Doesn't that mean we're going away from peace and towards more of a conventional war?
Well, in your question, you said that we'll be going to the wrong direction. Let me tell you what was the direction that we were heading towards, basically, before the withdrawal from the nuclear deal. We see more destructive, basically, activities in Syria, and more destructive activities in Iraq, more destructive activities in Lebanon, more destructive activities in Yemen. 160 ballistic missiles launched towards Saudi Arabia, including the capital, a G20 country. So Iran actions was leading to a bigger conflict. If we pressure Iran, if we make them pay a price for what they do, it's going to do exactly the opposite. It will basically stop Iran from continuous escalation that will get us to a bigger conflict in the region. And that's why we need to use all our tools and all options that should be on the table.
And what are those tools?
Well, we need to obviously solve this diplomatically. We need to increase the economic pressure on Iran to reach basically a better situation in the Middle East.
So in America, this seems to be a quagmire. There's so many different actors, so many different names, so many different acronyms. A lot of times it gets simplified into, Shia versus Sunni. What are the two biggest things, if you could boil them down, that would lead to, I won't say peace in the Middle East, that seems, but a de-escalation of the tensions?
Well, first of all, the friction between Saudi Arabia and Iran is not about Sunnis or Shias. It's about clash of visions, as I said. We have a forward-looking vision to improve our economy, to make our people's life better, basically, in the kingdom, and to move our society forward. To be able to achieve that objective, we want to have a stable, peaceful region around us, and prosperous region. We want to increase the economic, basically, cooperation. Iran wants to do the opposite. Iran has expansionist policy. They want to basically take over countries in the region. They have this destructive activities in the region that is pulling the region backward, not forward. This is the cause of friction. We have supported the Iraqi government fighting ISIS. And we're supporting, on the other side, the Yemeni government fighting Houthis and QAP. Iran is always in the sectarian side. We were always in the government institution side in Saudi Arabia. And there's a big difference on our position and the Iranian position.
The Iranians will say that Saudi have funded, let's say, Wahhabism, and then therefore the extremism on the Sunni side. What do you have to say to that?
Well, that is absolutely not true. Who is Osama bin Laden's number one enemy? Who is ISIS' number one enemy? What you have to do is listen to them. Listen to those terrorists and what they say. Their number one enemy is Saudi Arabia and the United States. Al-Qaeda have done 0 attacks in Iran. And in Saudi Arabia have more than 100, throughout our history, more than 130 terrorist attacks in Saudi Arabia, including the Saudi government. So it doesn't make any sense if we're going to fund basically anything that would threaten our country. Osama bin Laden himself, in his document that was found by the United States in Abbottabad, said clearly that Iran was basically funder of their activities, and he said Iran helps them also logistically, and he mentioned Iran as a partner against Saudi Arabia and the United States. Listen to what Osama bin Laden say. Look at his documents, and look at what they say also in their audio tapes. They're targeting Saudi Arabia. They're targeting the United States. Osama bin Laden's son, Hamza, he's in Iran, and he's issuing audio tapes against Saudi Arabia from Iran as we speak.
If I've been to Iran, I've been to Saudi Arabia. The one thing that strikes me as very similar between both cultures is they have a very young population in Saudi, a very young population in Iran. In Saudi Arabia, there seems to be a tremendous push from the young people for change, for modernization, all different kinds of social movements. You actually see, especially the young people in Tehran, who have satellite TV and who have relatives in LA or in London, somewhat of the same mindset. Why is it so completely different politically? Because you've got young people who seem to be not that far apart.
Yes.
But politically, it seems to be everyone's moving 100 miles in a different direction.
Here's the big difference. First of all, I think the Iranian people are great people. I think I think the Iranian people want to build their country. They want to move it forward, and they deserve better. The big difference is there are extremists in Saudi, but they're on the run, and they're a minority. There are extremists in Iran, but they're running the country, and they're a minority, basically. And that is the big difference between us and Iran. Look at, and you mentioned the Iranian people living abroad, basically, including in the United States. There are millions of people, millions of Iranians live in the United States and Germany and other countries in Europe. Have you seen any Saudi minority that lives in Europe or the United States? We've sent hundreds of thousands of students to the United States. More than 98% of them come back. Why? What's the reason? Because they have hope, because they want to move their country forward, because they feel that their country is going towards the right direction. And even the 1.5% that continue to stay in the United States, I meet some of them. They work in Google, YouTube, and other companies in the United States. Their future project is in Saudi. They want to come back because Saudi Arabia's ambition is to serve their own citizens, to move their country forward. It's different from the Iranian regime, extremist regime in Iran.
A couple more questions. I know you're busy. If you talk to the Iranians, they'll say, look, the Saudis have American military bases. Turkey is a sort of a NATO member. Pakistan, they'll say, is the home of extremism and the Taliban. Afghanistan, the Taliban and the American army. They portray themselves as surrounded. What do you have to say about that?
Well, first of all, there is no U.S. base in Saudi Arabia currently. Second of all, what you're telling me is the Iranian activity is a reaction, is not an action. I don't think that is true. If it's reaction, why did they bomb a building in Argentina in 1994? Why did they assassinate an opposition leader in Mykonos restaurant in Berlin in Germany? Why did they try to assassinate Saudi ambassador in Washington? Why did they create a militia in Nigeria, for example? A sectarian terrorist militias like Hezbollah in Nigeria. What they do is what they say is what's written in the Constitution. They want to export the revolution through any means possible, and that's what they've been doing since 1979. The strategic goal never changed. Their tactics have changed throughout the 40 years that passed, and that's what they've been doing since 1979.
A lot has been made about the new leadership in your country, yourself and your brother. Can you please tell us where you see the region going forward in the next 5 to 10 years?
What I see in Saudi Arabia is under the king's leadership and the crown prince, we have an ambitious, exciting plan to move our economy forward, to move our society forward, to move our country forward, to improve our education system, health system, to improve our economy, to create basically an environment for tourism, to create basically an entertainment, to invest inside Saudi Arabia and outside Saudi Arabia. And we have been very successful since we announced this Vision 2030. And I believe that countries in the region should replicate what Saudi Arabia is doing. We should be forward-looking countries. We are proud of our past. Our past is bright, but we should look at the future as brighter. And that's our vision. People in the region should not be basically used by ISIS or Al-Qaeda or the Iranian regime to fight their own wars. They should basically work to improve their countries, to move their countries forward, to have prosperous economy, to make, basically, to create jobs, to create opportunities. And that's what we're looking for in Saudi Arabia.
But if you're moving forward, and let's say UAE is moving forward, Bahrain, certain places, what happens if Iran says no, and we're going to keep doing what we're doing? We're going to keep on expanding. We're going to keep on sponsoring.
Well, we in Saudi Arabia and the international community should work together to push back on any country that is violating the international law, country that is basically pulling the world backward, country that is creating terrorist militias. That's the only option. And that's exactly what I said in my op-ed. We need to push back on these activities before we reach a bigger conflict that we all do not want.
So also referenced in your op-ed, which I found interesting, is you quote Ali Reza Zakani, who says there's 3 Arab capitals that are already a subsidiary of the Islamic Revolution: Beirut, Baghdad, and Damascus. So if that's the case, where do they stop?
Well, they mentioned 4 capitals: Beirut, Baghdad, and Damascus, and the 4th one, they meant Sana'a in Yemen. I don't think the Yemeni people want to be basically invaded by the Iranian regime. They want their country to be independent, and they should be independent. They have a great country and great people. And I don't think the Lebanese people want to be part of Iran. Just like what Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, said in one of his videos, old videos, that Lebanon should not be an independent country. It should be part of the Iranian expansionist ideology, basically. I don't think the Lebanese people want that. I don't think the Iraqi people want that. I don't think the Syrian people want that. I don't think anyone in the region wants to be part of Iran. They want to make their country better and to move it forward.
It seems that there's the region and there's Iran, and people are uniting in the region against Iran. Does His Royal Highness MBS support regime change in Iran?
Well, in Saudi Arabia, our policy, we do not interfere in countries' domestic politics. It's up to the Iranian people to decide. It's not up to us. But we see the Iranian people protesting. We see the Iranian people are not happy because the regime, instead of basically fixing their economy, reforming the economy, and serving the Iranian people, they've been basically spending all that money on activities in the region that has nothing to do with Iranian people or Iranian economy. It doesn't serve the Iranian national security and the Iranian people.
Thank you for your time today.